everyone, my name is Cyrus and welcome back to my channel. Today we're here to do another book review, this time on the book Winter Garden by Kristin Hannah. This was my first Kristin Hannah book that I've ever read. It was recommended to me by my wife, who read it and absolutely loved it and told me that I had to read it, so I did. I really liked this book, and I found out afterwards that Kristin Hannah is actually a pretty prolific writer, that she's actually written dozens and dozens of books. So pretty excited to maybe look at other books that she's written. I really enjoyed this one. I'm trying to do my best to read more on authors that I liked their work. I'm trying to kind of delve more into their back catalog of different things they've written, especially when it comes to standalones. I really enjoy standalone books in between the big series that I like to read. So when I find an author who writes really nice standalones, I like to try and delve into different standalones that they've written and continue to explore that, to learn a bit more about the different things that they do. So, Winter Garden. We're going to start off with some spoiler-free thoughts, and we'll jump a bit more into spoiler territory in a little bit. This book follows mainly two sisters, Meredith and Nina, who are trying to develop a stronger relationship with their mother. That's the main kind of premise of the story. The main way that they're doing that is their mother is telling them this fairy tale that she would tell them when they were kids, and now they're adults, and she's retelling them this story as they're trying to develop that relationship and make a stronger relationship between the three of them. That's the main way that they're kind of going about doing that. It's a very touching story. There's a lot of big surprises in the story that I didn't see coming, which was really nice. And it's just really a lot of beautiful characters, a lot of really strong female characters, which I kind of understand why my wife liked it so much. It was just a really nice way to hear about different things. I particularly liked the story that the mother is telling, the fairy tale that she's telling. That was really nice, and every time that we were kind of in that zone where she was telling the story, I was really locked in and really enjoyed those moments. But even afterwards, outside of that, when you're learning more about the lives that they're living, all that kind of stuff, that was really nice too. It was really kind of the interweaving of the story and what's happening in real time, in real life, was really well done, I thought, and I always wanted to learn more about the story, but it was also interesting to learn and know more about what's happening in real time. So I thought that balance was really well done. Overall, I really felt like this story was a story about relationships and just how important relationships are in your day-to-day life, and just maintaining relationships, building strong relationships. And that was really kind of highlighted between both Meredith and Nina in their lives, as we kind of saw what they were doing. What I really liked, it wasn't just romantic relationships, it was also friendships, it was relationships between family members, and so it was just a really nice way to highlight that. And I really thought that this book, that was kind of like, for me, the main message, the main takeaway that I got, was just to make sure that you're having strong relationships, that you're developing strong relationships, you're maintaining them, and almost maybe more important of all, that you're telling those people that you cherish them, and just to cherish that time that you have with people. So really liked Winter Garden. Those are some spoiler-free thoughts, and we're going to jump into some spoiler territory now. So if you haven't read the book, go and read it, come back, and join the conversation with some spoiler thoughts in just a second here. Okay, so jumping into some spoiler thoughts right now. Like I said, this was a really beautiful story, a lot of really nice things in this story, but there were also some things that were a little rough, I thought. Mainly, we're going through and we're looking at Meredith and Nina's perspective. That's the two perspectives that we have for the book. We're kind of hopping between the two of them. And there were just moments where they'd be doing things that would just, I feel like, would get under my skin. That being said, though, I also felt that those moments were super real and human, so I kind of appreciated them, even though they were a little bit frustrating. We can start off with Meredith a little bit. So Meredith, when we're in her perspective, she feels as though she cannot rely on anyone. She can't talk to anybody about anything that's going on in her head, that she has to complete everything by herself and do everything on her own, which I can understand how she got to that point, and that's pretty clear how she got to that point. They do a good job of showcasing that. But then getting to see, or having to see, that frustration and that disconnect between her and her husband, Jeff, especially, it was just so difficult to see that every time Jeff would try to reach out, Meredith would basically push him away in some capacity. They just both were unable to be there for each other in the way that the other person needed. Meredith tries to have a romantic night with Jeff, only to then get angry when Jeff shows up late, which apparently he's been doing for a couple weeks now, and she just hasn't noticed until this time when she wanted to do something with him. So it was just really frustrating to see that and to kind of feel as though you guys can fix this. This is totally fixable. You just need to sit down, have a conversation, share your thoughts. And in particular, like I said, there was a couple of moments with Meredith in particular that she would think to herself, oh, I should just tell him this, or I should just say this thing, I should just do this thing, and then decide not to at the last minute because either she was scared or couldn't do it. And it just kept on getting more frustrating and more frustrating. That being said, though, again, it felt very human. It felt like this is somebody who has just gone through a lot of rough moments, and this is kind of their coping mechanism. This is what they do. They feel as though they have to do everything by themselves because that's kind of the behavior that has been modeled for them, what they've been kind of expected of. And so, although it was very frustrating, it also, again, felt very human, and I could understand why or where that was coming from. And then with Nina, it was basically the kind of the same thing, just a little bit different. With Nina and her partner Danny, her just completely unwilling to accept that she is in love with him and talk with him about that. And when he kind of lays it out all on the table for her and expresses his love for her, she's just unable to reciprocate that in any way, even though she does feel that way. And so, again, that frustration of why can't you just have these conversations? And that's kind of what we learn about. We learn about why they can't have those conversations throughout the rest of the story as their mom is telling them the story, the fairy tale, and you kind of get to find out more about that. And we'll get into that in a second. But those moments felt very frustrating, but in the end, also very human. And so although they were frustrating, it ended up being really nice to see that. And it kind of, it's what I think what started out, it started out as a bit more of an annoyance of, why is this happening? This is so annoying. And as you learn more, it makes a lot more sense. And looking back at it retroactively, I kind of almost liked those moments more after having learned what I know now at the end of the book. A couple more things before we start delving into the main, to me, what was the main crux of the story, which was the fairy tale that the mom was telling. On that note of the fairy tale, once we got to the point where we were learning a bit more about that and Anya was starting to tell the story to Nina, it was getting really frustrating that Meredith was so reluctant on being a part of that whole experience. It was getting annoying for me as the reader because I wanted to know about that experience, and so then Meredith kind of slowing that down was just annoying. But it totally made sense for her character to not want to be a part of that, not want to learn about it. So although it made complete sense as a reader, I was like, I just want to know this fairy tale. I just want to learn about it. Come on, just go and be a part of this. Some of the more, for me, the more wholesome moments of the story were between the daughters and their dad when their dad was dying, and they were just there for them in that relationship. You could just tell, even though he was only on page for a short amount of time, that love that was expressed between them was just so palpable. It was just so clear. And again, even though he was just there for a little bit of time, his absence was felt so clearly. I felt it was just really cool to see that, even though he was there for such a short period. And so I really liked those moments. That was really, really nice. Another frustrating thing, though, was that, again, the lack of communication between Nina and Meredith. When Meredith decides ultimately to put Anya in a home because she's having these episodes over and over again, and she just doesn't tell Nina about it and basically refuses to. And Nina comes home, has this big reaction, and that was really frustrating for me on a bit, both of them, on Meredith for not telling Nina, but on Nina's part, Nina's reaction to me was totally unfounded. She was not around and not experiencing this and having basically left Meredith to do it all on her own. So again, just a little bit of frustration with the communication between the sisters there, but ultimately that was able to get figured out, and then they were able to move on from that in just like a short time after that. But that interaction again was something that was like frustrating, but again, felt real, felt human, that Meredith would be hesitant or unwilling to share that information, and then obviously when Nina gets back, she's going to have frustrations about that situation as well. Now to get a bit more into the fairy tale, which for me was really, like I said, the whole point of this whole story, you can tell right from the prologue that the fairy tale is really important. You don't really understand why for quite some time, but right when Meredith and Nina are about to put on that play and the reaction they get from Anya once they start doing that, it was just super clear, okay, this is really important, but you don't really understand why. After their father passes and they're able to start sitting down with their mom and hearing the fairy tale more and beginning to find out that this is fishy, right? That not everything is lining up. Now they're adults, they can understand things a bit more, they have more critical thinking abilities, and especially with Nina having been basically a reporter with the photographs that she takes, really able to start picking things out and just finding little plot holes or inconsistencies within the story and kind of realizing there's something here that doesn't quite make sense, that doesn't check out, and her kind of digging deep to figure that out a little bit. I started to also, kind of at the same time as Nina, try and dig into it. Okay, clearly something's here. This obviously feels like it's Anya's story, but who could Anya be within this story? It doesn't really check out. It doesn't make sense. She's obviously not the mom in the story because the timeline doesn't check out. So then I thought, okay, maybe she's Vera or Olga in the story, But then we found out that Vera has a kid named Anya, and I thought maybe she's that Anya, but then that Anya would probably be too young in the current timeline. And then obviously you do find out that she is Vera, that Anya, the mom, Meredith and Nina's mom, is Vera. And so you find this out, and then as she's telling this story, just to think that someone would be able to go through such harrowing and just horrible times and come through it on the other end and just make it through was just honestly incredible. I cried when Olga died. That was just so sad, that explosion, and then she just continues digging with the spoon. I just completely lost it when her mother died and basically left her alone to deal with everything all on her own. And my heart just broke. And I just felt like there was nothing left when Leo and then Anya and Sasha all die. And Vera just feels like there's nothing to live for anymore. And she just walks basically all the way to enemy lines and hopes that they kill her because she's not strong enough to take her own life in this situation. And ends up getting taken into concentration camps and lives there for around 3 years, it sounds like, based on the story and the timeline, until she's finally rescued. Just to have to go through that. Obviously, concentration camps, we have a better idea of what happened there through the history books, but the way that they've described the situation that was going on in Russia for the just regular civilians, you know, them treating oiled cakes made out of sawdust and oil like it was gold as they were eating that, just to have something to eat and put into their stomachs. Just the fact they were basically freezing and just dying of starvation in the cold and just withering away. It was just so horrible to read and think about, and think how these people didn't make the decision to go into war and they're all being affected in this way. And it really, for me, made me feel super and eternally grateful that I have never had to experience anything like that hopefully I never will have to experience anything like that. But then also kind of highlighted or made me again think and realize that some people right now in the world are experiencing this kind of thing. And it's not anything that anybody should ever have to experience. It is completely unnecessary. And yeah, it was just horrible to think about and read about, and to put yourselves in those shoes. I couldn't believe it. And then again, to think that in this story, Vera went through all of this and came out the other end is just truly, truly unbelievable. And all the while we're learning more and more about this story. The three women are on this cruise to Alaska, and everything that they're doing, the relationship is getting stronger and stronger as Vera is opening up more and more with her two daughters. And it just was so nice to see that relationship get to develop and get stronger as she told that story. And it was just so nice to get to see that their dad's wishes for her to tell the story was so founded and just so important for them to actually do that. And so getting to see that, the little moments between Meredith and Anya or Vera on the patio of the deck when they're out in the dark and they're talking to one another, and she says, okay, come to my room, we're going to continue the story now. Just all these little things were just so nice to learn about, and it was just really good to see. And all the while this is happening and they're getting closer, Meredith and Nina are also kind of growing a bit, and they're realizing maybe the things that they need to do better in their life to continue to develop their relationships. And so Meredith calls Jeff, apologizes, they have a really good reconnection, and they're able to kind of figure their stuff out. Nina realizes that she actually loves Danny and wants to call him and be with him. So just all these things that are happening are getting Nina, Meredith, and Anya to get closer together, and are also helping Meredith and Nina, outside of that, strengthen their own relationship. So just really nice to kind of see that and get to see that healing happening in that moment. But for me, the real kicker of this whole thing is when they get to Dr. Adamovich and Vera finishes telling her story. Starts again from the beginning, tells her whole story, and we get to the point where we find out that Leo has died, that Anya has died, that Sasha has died. And just, it's a horrible thing to have to relive and retell. But she does it. Nina is crying. Meredith is crying. But the doctor's son tells them, you know, I think my dad wants you to take all of these documents and bring them to his old research assistant. And I think he would just really appreciate if you were able to do that for him. And they say, okay, sure, we can do that. That's fine. And they go that evening. They go and they drop things off. And when they do, they knock on the door. This gentleman opens the door and he calls for his wife. And who else shows up but Stacy, the person who served them at the restaurant a couple days ago. And that was another really cute and just really wholesome interaction where she's giving them all this Russian food, gives them caviar, they have vodka shots together, and just, you know, Vera gets just really this really homely feeling of home for her, of Russia. And just really nice to be able to get to see that environment. And it's so nice. Oh, Stacy's back. That's great. And they're sitting there and they're talking and their eyes meet in this different circumstance. And you realize that this woman is Anya. That Anya survived. And you find out that not only did she survive, but also Sasha survived. And they lived in Alaska. And they were there this whole time. And it's this beautiful and almost like crushing reunion that they have. But there is that reunion. And you find out that Vera just missed Sasha by a year, that Sasha was alive until just the past year. It was like I said, it was heartbreaking. It was amazing to see, and it was such a shocking thing that I would have never guessed in a million years. I would have never ever guessed that. But it was so beautiful to see that reconnection. It was just amazing. And then the perfect cherry on top of this whole story was the epilogue. The fact that that was written from Vera's point of view, I thought was a super classy touch to just finish off this story. It was just so nice to get to see her finishing writing her story, that she becomes a writer like her father wanted her to be, and to find out that although she's experienced all this hardship in her life and she's had so much trouble in her life, that for the last 10 years, she's been able to live this beautiful, full, whole life with all three of her daughters. It was just something that she really deserved, and it was a really just the perfect way, I thought, to finish off this story. I would have not have wanted it to finish off any other way but this. It was an absolutely amazing ending to the story. And so as I sit here and I'm reflecting more on this story, it makes me again just think about the importance of small decisions in your life and how often small decisions can have these long-lasting ripple effects that you don't even know about until later on in life. Some obvious examples in this story are the fact that Vera decides to not share her story with her daughters, and that creates this resentment, creates all this animosity, and effectively disallows her from having this relationship with Meredith and Nina for such a long time. The fact that Meredith and Nina both basically decide not to communicate effectively with their partners and how that affects their relationships. But the most glaring and obvious example in this story to me is the fact that Vera decided at some point to not go and visit Dr. Adamovich and tell her story. And had she done that, 20 or 30 years earlier, whenever initially he reached out to her, she would have gone, she would have told her story, and he would have said, hey, I think I know what happened to your husband and your daughter, and I have their story here too, and let me connect you guys. And she would have had this reconnection so much sooner in her life had she decided to do that. Now, I can totally get why she would not have wanted to retell her story and relive those moments. I don't know if I would have wanted to in that moment either. But this one little moment, this one decision that she made, if she had made a different one, she would have met or reconnected with her daughter so much sooner. And sure, there might have been some awkwardness there between Sasha and Evan. I'm fairly confident that everyone would have figured it out, and that the three of them, Sasha, Evan, and Vera, could have lived a really happy life between the three of them. But it just planting this little brainworm in my head of how small decisions can just have lasting impacts that you don't even realize until later on. And I think as I'm reading different stories and as I see that happen more and more often, it's just, in my head a lot. Overall, this is an incredibly beautiful story. It is an incredibly touching, down-to-earth, heartwarming, and human story. I think the message that Winter Garden is trying to convey about the importance of relationships is a super important message that I think everybody needs to hear. And I would strongly, strongly recommend Winter Garden to almost anybody who'd be interested. It is an incredible book. It also really made me think about the effect that war has on innocent lives. And that's not something that I'd really ever thought about before or really stopped to consider. And I really appreciate it for that, because I think now that, every time I see war happening on the news or I hear about this story will resurface in my mind. And I'll think about how these innocent people are being affected by this in different ways. And so I really appreciate this book for opening my eyes to that. My eyes that might have been a bit ignorant in that way. So I would very strongly give Winter Garden a strong 4 out of 5 stars. Highly recommend this book. If you've read Winter Garden, please put your thoughts about the story in the comments below. I'd be really interested to hear about it. I'd be really interested to have a more in-depth conversation about this story with you. And if you have any recommendation of the next Kristin Hannah book that I should read, please let me know. I really like this book, and I'm excited to delve deeper into her back catalog as I kind of search for more standalones that are giving me little breaks in between larger series. So please let me know which Kristin Hannah book I should read next. If you have any suggestions, I'd be more than happy to hear them. And I'll see you next time.